Welcome back to the Elias Makos Show, third hour of the program. Here's how we will begin. A story we talked about on the Big Five at 9:05. We'll continue on that thread. Now, a judge in Hamilton, Ontario, has put that province's official sexual offenders registry in jeopardy after ruling it unconstitutional. Justice Davin Garg of the Ontario Court of Justice ruled in favor of a convicted sex offender's defiance to having their name registered with the provincial database. The decision follows one made by the Supreme Court of Canada in 2022. They ruled the National Sex Offender Registry infringed on charter rights by being too broad and disproportionate. In this case, the judge concluded that he is not persuaded that lifetime reporting assists police in time-sensitive investigations. Let's get Ari Goldkind's take on this one. Of course, he's a criminal defense lawyer and a legal expert, and he's on the line. Hi, Ari.
Elias, great to be with you.
So, listen, you're a defense lawyer. How do you feel about this decision?
So, look, when I speak to you, and I think your audience who hears you and I talk from time to time knows that I have a defense lawyer hat, and then I have a tax-paying Canadian citizen hat. And those two hats, at times, compete with each other. From a defense lawyer point of view, I can tell you why this makes sense, as most of your listeners think that it doesn't. Because I think most people react to this and say, this is crazy. Why are we bending over backwards to protect the rights of sex offenders and such? So I'll give you the defense lawyer answer, which does have meat on the bone. But then I'll give you the reason why I think stories like this really bother the Canadian public, and I think that tension is justified. So maybe I'll start there, Elias.
Yeah, please.
Why this okay. What I think has happened in the last 20 to 30 years is that the criminal justice system has bent over backwards more often than it should to protect the rights of criminals as opposed to victims. Society now that is very low trust. We have a society that is very high crime. You're seeing all sorts of new examples of the scourge of crime like extortion, the shootings, all of the things you're seeing where these kinds of crimes were once imaginable. Here we're talking about sexual violence. People put on a sex offender registry. There is, I think, a justifiable debate and discussion that the public just feels that their public officials, their government, the liberal government, all levels of government, quite frankly, are just creating and allowing a more lawless society. And when you get to sexual offenders, and the public reads cases that now people who had to report because they were sexual offenders, it's now unconstitutional to make them do that in a court out of Hamilton. The public goes, hold on a second, isn't the number one duty of a government to keep citizens safe and to protect women and children from being sexually offended? That's why I think this story is one of many. The bail issue, as you know, the length of sentencings that you know, rates for murder that you and I have talked about a bunch. Now, here's the defense lawyer part. And this is the part that I think should make your listeners go, oh, I didn't realize that part of the story. The judge in Hamilton, Elias, said basically, look, these principles are noble. The registry is a great idea. I have no problem with the registry. Sure, some people don't deserve to be on it because they're a low risk to reoffend, so they shouldn't be on it for life, which is what the Supreme Court basically said. But here's where the rubber meets the road, and I'll pause my answer here because I think most people don't know this. The judge invited the Crown and the police to give him any examples of where this registry in Hamilton led to police actually finding a bad guy or preventing a bad guy from committing a sexual crime. Literally invited it into his court, said, show me how this registry, which somebody only has to report once a year. That's not crazy onerous, Elias. It's not once a month. But he said, show it to me. Give me the numbers. Prove it. Show me how this registry led somebody on an Amber Alert or a potential lost child or potential sexual crime from working. And the Crown came in essentially empty-handed. And that is what is not being reported heavily enough.
Were they empty-handed because there was incompetence in tracking these things, or because it actually these registries don't work?
I'm not so sure they don't work. I just don't know that they're a magic pill. At the end of the day, there's so much nuance to these kinds of crimes. It's not, you and I can watch tonight, Elias, a Netflix show or an HBO show where there's this, predator in the midst in southern Mississippi or eastern Kentucky. And, everybody looks at him and goes, that guy looks like it. That's not really the case when it comes to these registries. So the government, the Crown, was asked, look, can you prove that this registry led to a time-sensitive arrest? Nope. There's also some mismanagement that was alleged in that unit in Hamilton where it's run by one person and nobody can. I'm not going to get too into it. It's kind of boring. Yeah. But at the end of the day, a judge has to concern him or herself with evidence. And when the judge rolled out the red carpet and said, look, I'm prepared to listen to you. I'm prepared to go your way. Convince me that what you're doing leads to success. When you can't do that, it becomes pretty easy, Elias, for a judge to use a word that we don't use in our everyday lives with our families, but here's the judicial word, overbroad.
But can I ask you this? Because here's one argument that was made in the court, right? The court heard that 44% of abducted children who are murdered die within an hour of being taken, okay?
Terrible.
So to have a registry where instantaneously you can find any registered offenders who are in the vicinity, that to me seems like, well, maybe it's a shot in the dark, but at least there's a shot, and that's worth it.
So that's where I was going with this, which is, again, remember, part two of my answer, which I started with, which is that tension between balancing rights. Remember, this is a once-a-year reporting requirement, not once a month, not once every 2 weeks. Now, if you're on the registry and you're a low risk to reoffend, you have a very strong argument coming through me, your defense lawyer, that this ruins your life. Your employer has to know, or you at least have to list where your employment is. That keeps somebody unemployable, basically down in society, and then having to go on welfare or ODSP the way so many people are on the dole these days. So there is a human cost to this. But to your question of, look, whether it's a shot in the dark, which I think is actually the name of a very good true crime book about a serial killer, I'm sure that's the name of it. It comes to me. That's where the tension is, which are people saying, well, look, if sexual offending is the boogeyman of our society, the thing that we want least to happen to women and children, how is this unconstitutional when the intention is good? It's not like it's suggested that cops are abusing the system, Elias, and walking up to people's jobs and going, hey, do you have Chester the child molester there? This is a tool for police to access in these very high-stress early moments. You mentioned the 44% in the first hour. But again, when a judge gets told, okay, show me how in any of those cases of that 44%, this registry has helped you find the perpetrator, and the answer comes back empty, very tough for a judge to turn a blind eye to that.
Okay, well, to wrap up here on this one, Ari, I want to ask you about this thing and talking about balance, right? And it's the balance between what the National Assembly here in Quebec, the provincial legislatures across the rest of the country, the government of Canada, the laws that our elected officials pass versus the judges that say, sorry, I don't want to see this law anymore. And I'm just wondering if the balance is there still, because I see all too often, I think governments are allowed to make mistakes. Like, governments are allowed to pass bad laws at times, and then we'll learn from them. But it seems like judges are taking the matters into their hands far too often. Do you have a thought on that?
I do. So as a defense lawyer, my thought is everything is hunky-dory and great, and we have the greatest system in the world, and everybody should shut up. As a tax-paying, normal-thinking citizen, I go by the first thing I said as we started, and I know you have to go to break soon. I think that tension is one that the public doesn't debate enough. I think the will of the people at the voting booth is always much more important to me than what we see in a lot of courtrooms where people with significant social justice agendas, which I think is an oxymoron. I don't think those two words actually mean what people think they do. I have a real problem with that, and because you probably got to pay some bills in an ad soon, here's the part that I don't think happens enough. Yeah. The most important clause in the Constitution or the Charter, Elias, is the notwithstanding clause. It's never used. It's spoken about like Voldemort. It's threatened. It comes up in stories in an editorial where Doug Ford will threaten it. Maybe Danielle Smith threatens it. That is a tool that should be used. It gives 5 years for politicians to say, no, we care about the will of the people, not a social justice warrior. And in 5 years, the government has a chance to tweak it, change it, or go back to the polls and the people. Last time I checked, the silent majority, Elias, should be a lot less silent. And if they were a lot more outspoken, our country would be on a better path, because right now I don't think it is.
You're preaching to the choir here. And of course, we're in Quebec, where we have a government that has the courage to use the notwithstanding clause at times. Even if sometimes we may not like it, they've got the courage to use it. And I think there's a good reason why at times. Ari, I have to leave it there. Thanks so much.
Good to be with you.
Criminal defense lawyer Ari Goldkind.
I'm Luke Wilson. Join me each week for Film Never Lies. Since retiring from the NFL, I've had a lot on my mind, and now I've got my own show. So if you're tired of lazy takes, if you want honest conversations, join us each week. Film Never Lies, available on all TSN platforms and the iHeartRadio app.